longer a weakness. They feel better about it because they feel confident enough on something they need to know.
Oh, let's go. Party time.
It's a whole continuum, and every single preference is on that continuum.
Adjust their chin angle down so they can perceive the ball up a little bit more.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the MPE Podcast. Nick Robinson here alongside Matt Woods, David Janest. Today we got a special guest. It's the head strength and conditioning coach at the Baylor School, works across multiple sports, and has started integrating motor preferences into the weight room at Baylor. Welcome to the show, Brice Johnson. Appreciate you coming on.
Appreciate you guys having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were just catching up a little bit offline, but just wanted to kind of get a roundabout idea of kind of what your role looks like at Baylor, the sports that you work with. So we'll get some background on you and kind of go from there.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Yeah. So what does your role currently look like right now? What is it that you do, your day-to-day look like at Baylor?
So my day-to-day right now is actually pretty complex because we're in the middle of the spring. So we've got 9 in-season teams, plus all of our major off-season teams, being football, volleyball, female soccer. So handling all of the off-season training and scheduling, as well as handling all of the in-season training and scheduling for 9 or 10 really good high-level teams, as well as we are currently integrating our force plates and our new GPS software. And we are doing our first ever actual scientific research project on our own athletes. So the men's soccer team is in the middle of doing a scientific research project for us, basically doing a project to check the fatigue monitoring systems that we're doing. So I'm organizing and kind of collecting and working with our research department, as well as our student who is in charge of the research project, to get all that quantified and organized, make sure we're getting all the tests in, and making sure that we're getting all the reporting, so that we have some really good data to look at the end of the year.
That's awesome. That's awesome. For you guys, for Matt and David, didn't get a chance to head out to Chattanooga. But I was definitely sending them pictures. Baylor is no joke. It's a legit campus. It's awesome over there. You guys definitely missed out on not being able to get over there. But that project sounds really cool.
I'm definitely very thankful for getting to go to work there every day. It doesn't matter how bad of a mood you're in when you pull into campus and you see the sun coming up over the river, you know, the acreage and everything that we've got there. That alone, before you even start coaching multiple high-level kids, is enough to just make you smile and forget about whatever's bothering you that day, for sure.
I still got FOMO from not being able to go. That's for sure.
So walk us through kind of your background in getting into strength and conditioning. How did you get into the field, and you know, what led you over to Baylor?
So kind of a long story. I'll make it pretty short. I got into strength and conditioning. I played college football, suffered a shoulder injury, separated my shoulder multiple times. And so I was just studying in school and no longer playing college football. Took a break from school, went and helped out with hurricane relief work after Hurricane Katrina. My best friend and his whole family are from New Orleans. So I went down there with them and decided didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. Came back to school, started working out a ton, had a bunch of time on my hand at that point because all I was doing was school, and just kind of fell into doing some personal training. And I was studying business and finance. Obviously, I like the weight room a lot better. I don't really like sitting in front of computers, even though a lot of my day is spent that way now. And so once I started doing a little bit of small personal training, I figured out really quickly that I wanted to do that kind of stuff, and not necessarily do business. And so that kind of grew. I started studying Olympic weightlifting, got into Olympic weightlifting coaching and competing myself. And then kind of made the switch after about 8 years of doing a lot of successful personal training to move more towards the athletes and sports performance side of things, and work with younger people. Didn't really want to train adults anymore. And so I started training a couple young kids. First kid I actually trained, completely random, but he's incredible. Ended up, he's a Chattanooga kid, ended up going to Vanderbilt out of high school, starting for 4 years, and then ended up signing with the Jacksonville Jaguars as a free agent and starting for them at corner for 4 or 5 years. So, not everybody gets to train professional athletes their entire career. And it just so happened that the first kid that I got to work with, and that really working with him, I would say, was the pivotal moment in my career where I was like, okay, sports performance is exactly where I want to be. I need to learn more about this. So really dove into Olympic weightlifting and sports performance at that point. Started running my own facility called Bridge City Strength and Performance. And then ran that along with a CrossFit gym as well. And while I was doing that, I did an internship at Baylor just to kind of help out part-time. Absolutely fell in love with it. That was really my first introduction to large group training, which I had never done. And I was a little bit coming out of personal training, working with, 30 athletes, 40, 50, 60 athletes. Was a little intimidating at first. And then I just fell in love with it. So just kind of started chasing both of those things. And at some point, the business was growing. We were really busy. My role at Baylor continued to grow as an assistant. I was taking care of more teams. That's when I really got into the baseball side of things. One of my best friends, Billy Berry, took over the head coaching job at Baylor, and we structured it much more like a college program. So I started traveling with the team, spent a lot of time with those guys. And from that point on, that was maybe 2015. From that point on, obviously we've had a ton of extremely high level baseball players come through. So I had to learn a lot about not just sports performance, but a lot about the sport of baseball. My son was playing baseball, so I was spending every day doing it anyways. And then in 2020, I took over as the director of sports performance, actually over COVID, for the Baylor School. I had already been an assistant for about 8 years. And so I've been in charge of all 19 sports plus the middle school since 2020.
How do you see, you mentioned, getting into Olympic lifting first, and you got into, more personal coaching for older adults, and then you switched to the younger side, and then you got into sports performance. Like, how do you see movement patterns change across the demographics? Like, what's different, that kind of you had to evolve with in terms of your training and your instruction across the different demographics?
Man, that's a great question. Obviously, older people are way more stuck in their motor patterns. So you kind of have what you have if you're working, doing personal training with a 50-year-old, is very different. The goals are very different. All high level training programs, regardless of what age you're training, regardless of what you are training for, should start there. What are you training for, right? The purpose and the why of what you're training should be the center of how you're programming and doing those things. But just watching human movement, you see, later on in life, it is much harder to change motor patterns that you've been doing for that long. Whereas you go backwards and go to middle school kids, and they're going through puberty, and they haven't really established any huge concrete motor patterns, but they're starting to do those things. So I had to really change my mindset as far as from training adults and training Olympic weightlifting. Olympic weightlifting is geared towards the sport of Olympic weightlifting, right? Which is exactly what it should be. But those movements and those ranges of motion are also geared towards the sport of Olympic weightlifting. So I had to really understand the difference between the demands of the sport and their natural movement patterns. And just watching different people move, watching different age groups move. It is much easier to train adults because they're basically the same person every time they come to see you. You start with a middle school kid, 6th or 7th grade, they're going to move one way. And then in a year or two, they're going to hit puberty. They're going to grow 6 inches. They're going to move a completely different way. So even just watching my kids, I mean, to be fair, both of my children learned how to like snatch and clean and jerk a PVC pipe when they were like 2 years old. But watching them evolve as they grew and looking at different things that they wanted to do and then different things that they were good at doing. And, you know, from one year, you're really good at doing this. And then all of a sudden you've been doing all this squatting and now you're hitting puberty and all of a sudden the bottom position of a squat doesn't look so comfortable anymore. So really just kind of identifying, number one, the sport demands and what they need to move, and then just creating balance, right? Like understanding that good positions are actually pretty easy to see. If you get out of the mindset of forcing certain positions because you understand why you were putting people in those positions in the first place, that's the biggest change, right? With adults, you have to put them into safe positions to get stronger, to get fit. With Olympic weightlifting, you have to get into extreme deep ranges of motion because that's where you're going to end up on the competition floor, and you need to be strong and you need to be able to stabilize and brace against those things. And then going to the sports performance side of things, now everything is completely different. It's all based on how you move and then what the requirements of that sport are. Just because there's scientific research that shows quarter squats have more translation to running and jumping than a full depth squat doesn't mean that a full depth squat is bad, right? It's just, why are you moving through these ranges of motion and what's the purpose and what are you trying to get out of it? If you understand those things, it makes a lot of sense why the science says that the quarter squat is going to translate more, because those are the same joint angles that you're going to run and jump in, right? So, you know, it's when you take a step back and you watch people move, the biggest thing that I learned in my career was when it looks really uncomfortable and it looks really unstable and it looks really weak, it's not a good position. So if you think it's a good position and that's what it looks like, you're wrong. And they're going to move into positions that they want to be in, and then understanding the angles that you need to be able to create and being willing to take those things and make some changes. If you're not a good squatter, but we need to be able to create some forward shin angles, some deeper ankle flexion ankles because of the sport that you play, that's okay. We can do some single leg modifications instead of doing a back squat to be able to train those angles and get better in those angles and physically prepare you to be better at back squatting later on down the road. So I think that's the biggest thing I noticed was it's so important to observe their motor patterns. And I think that's the reason why, honestly, especially the first time I heard about all of the MPE stuff, why it clicked with me and made so much sense, because I challenge my coaches every day not to think this is how you do this exercise, but to understand what's safe and what's not safe, and then watch and figure out what a good position looks like and understand who's moving well and who's not moving well. Because if your athletes are moving well, they're going to be good athletes.
Absolutely. What I really like you said there was like taking a step back. That's what I was thinking as you're saying that whole thing, taking a step back and really understanding what is the goal, like what is a sport telling us that we need to do, and then what looks natural. I always go back to, and we joked about this at your clinic. Jimmy Jackson, the pitching coach at Maryland, always says, "Well, if it looks messed up, it's probably messed up." So the ease of being in the position is so important, and you can see it for some players that move against how they really want to from the extremes. there's a level of uneasiness that goes through it. It just looks difficult for them. It doesn't look natural. So I think that's a really good point there. So it's actually a great transition into the question that we ask all of our guests when they come on. And in your own words, how would you describe motor preferences? We kind of touched on it here and there a little bit within that, it seemed like, but how would you, in your own words, define motor preferences?
To me, the best way to kind of define it and understand it is it's an athlete's way of creating the most efficient movement pattern for their body. Doesn't matter if it's a sports skill, it doesn't matter if it's in the weight room. What we're looking for is balance and efficiency. If I have balance, I'm going to be strong, I'm going to be powerful, I'm going to be efficient. If I don't have balance, I'm going to be none of those things. It doesn't matter what else I do. You can't be strong without balance. You can't be powerful without balance. You can't be efficient without balance, because no matter what you're doing, you're fighting against finding the balance before you're trying to complete the task of whatever it is. It doesn't matter if it's squatting, hitting a baseball, throwing a baseball, shooting a basketball, playing defense. It makes no difference. You have to be on balance for you to be able to be efficient in what you can do.
100%. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like, there's so many misconceptions about, motor preferences that are out there, and, it sounds very science project like, and really start to boil down once you peel the layers of the onion and you start to understand, we label the science in order to communicate about it. And once you understand, what some of these definitions and some of these vocabulary type words like aerial and terrestrial mean, you start to understand, like, oh, it's just related to balance. Like, if I'm balanced, like you said, I can be powerful, I can be efficient. From a hitting perspective, I can be adjustable, I can be adaptable, I can be, have related to my vision, my head stays still. From a pitching standpoint, I can repeat my move day after day. And, we always talk about balance precedes everything. And if we're not in that position, how are we talking about any swing flaws that we see? How are we talking about, this person can't get into X range of motion in the weight room without balance? So I think such an overarching theme that I feel like gets misconstrued a lot of times, and it's refreshing to hear your take on it and how you've seen it translate, not only from sport but in the weight room to then also in everyday life that you've seen already before.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, I mean, I understand some of the pushback in some of the sports, especially sports like for baseball and softball. Those are such skill-based sports that you have to get really skilled at doing those things. So the overall theme, no coach is purposely trying to make someone not be balanced. They're trying to coach them to be balanced. For me, the difference is all I look at is human movement. That was what my philosophy of training was built on, was watching people move instead of saying this is the movement and it has to be this. If you're a baseball coach, you probably didn't start with just watching people move. You probably started with, hey, hands got to be here. We got to stay inside the baseball. We see this going on in the lower half, so we've got to be able to create this. So it comes from a good place, but then it's such a skilled movement. You have to coach and spend time on all of these little skills. And if you're not starting from a place of balance and a place that athlete feels comfortable in, you're going to coach them out of what they want to do, and not on purpose. I mean, we saw it with, the hitter that Nick evaluated and worked with during our clinic. And his dad is a college baseball coach, one of my best friends, and still one of the best coaches I have been around for hitting. He's awesome. But some of the philosophies that made sense to him and some of the things that they tried to do because they thought it would generate more power for his son fought against his preference. And now we got to work backwards a little bit. But when you go back and look at the videos from 12 years old, that's what he was already doing. And then when we try to make something better, again, right, we said it earlier, less is more. I know everybody wants to, do more and continue to stack and, but sometimes you really don't have to do that. If you're having success, why would you change something to have more success later on down the road in a situation that doesn't even exist yet? You are here today and today only. If what you are doing is working and you are winning, why are you changing that?
100%.
I think David, I would love to hear you like expand on. I think some of the two biggest takeaways that, I've taken away from you is, taking a step back, like Brice said, and, seeing things as they are and not how they want to be, or not how we want them to be. And then two, like we evaluate someone from a movement standpoint of if they're in pain or, if they're performing, and if, they're not in pain and they're performing, then we're going to leave them alone. We don't have to integrate anything that we're talking about. So you want to expand on that, David?
Well, that's the whole point is getting back to what just Brice told about coaches' philosophy, like they all have cognitive bias. So they're like, it works for that player, it should work for everybody, or it works for me, so it should work for everybody. When actually, if you look at the morphology of individuals, you will see like nobody's the same. Like we all have different length segments. Like my legs are not the same. I don't have the same length as Brice, so we're different. It's like telling me like a V8 from Ferrari is the same V8 as a Ford. Like both are the same principle, but if you look closely, the details are like completely different. So it's not because we are human beings globally looking the same that we should move the same. And the second thing like we can probably tell also is you can actually move outside. It may look weird, okay, but you can move not naturally. You can do it. The only question I'm always asking people is what is the cost? What is the cost of what you're doing? Like you can create any kind of movement with your body, but at what cost? And I can add actually at what risk? Those are two things that are pretty important. So if you take a look at people, how they walk, how they play basketball, how they shoot, how they swing, you can really see like people more standing upward, more inflection. You can really see that. So the question is always, why do you want to force someone to do something against himself?
Well, I think back to what you said early on about just the differences of training an adult versus someone that's more in middle school is just the energy levels are different, right? Like that's the main thing, of course, right? So the middle schooler has all the energy in the world. They're super adaptable. They can do anything they want, right? They can fall out of a tree after they climb it all day and they'll be somewhat fine, right? Like compared to an adult doing that, the energy levels are way lower, right? That's an extreme example, but when it comes to energy, it's so important. But you start.
There's another thing on the top of that, and you can actually agree with you. But also, when you're young, you're still building your motor patterns, so you need to climb in the trees. Actually, that's the goal of being young: is to fall, learn, stand up, repeat, find a solution. That's why those kids actually are going like. Nowadays it doesn't exist anymore, but I remember when I was young, I was climbing in the trees, I was jumping from bridge to water, whatever, like just having fun, playing the country. When you're like 50 years old, you don't need that anymore. You have your own motor patterns. You found your solution already. And again, like I agree with you, you have a lower level of energy, you can get tired faster. So you're gonna probably stay more into what you are instead of exploring all the potential that you can in order to build, to make your choice for the future. So until puberty and even almost puberty, like the body is learning, the brain is learning. And we have to make sure those two things are mature enough. Now we can start to train them correctly. That's why there's difference of practicing, and I'm quite sure Brice will agree with me, like you don't train a 12-year-old kid the same way you train an 18-year-old kid. That even the aerobie and anaerobie system are not the same place. So just this doesn't work. So like the fiber types are kind of decided, but not totally. So we can actually manage kind of at 12 years old if you want to make someone more endurant or not, but not at 50. It's done.
When you
So
can
yeah,
feel so much more, right? Like that's the reason why, even as a 40-year-old training now, I can control and feel everything that I'm doing in my body that I couldn't feel when I was trying to compete in weightlifting when I was, much younger.
Mhm.
But I have more, like everything is where it is, right? I have much more body awareness. My motor patterns are where they are. My muscles, my energy, my aerobic system, my anaerobic system, all these things are fully developed. And
Mhm.
now I can feel all of those things, where when you try to structure that stuff that deep with young athletes, they can't feel. I mean, that I try to tell my coaches all the time. I'm like, I understand that what you are saying makes perfect sense to you, and it sounds really simple. You might as well be speaking Chinese to some of these kids because they're not understanding it. They can't feel it. You gotta put them in positions, and you got to let them move and let them kind of figure out, okay, yeah, that feels good. Okay, I can. They don't even know how to engage every muscle in their body yet. And so, the maturity levels and the difference in your motor patterns is so much different. I think you have to take that stuff into consideration, because what you don't want to do is force motor patterns early that don't fit. Because at some point in time, you're not going to be able to reverse them all the way, right? Like at some point in time, when they get later on down the road, if they stay in that same preference, like to David's point, what's the cost, right? There's going to be a cost. You may be an uber incredible athlete, and you may be able to compete and train your body outside of your preference for a really long time and compete at a high level. But at some point, there is cost to being inefficient, whether that means you just can't continue to compete or whether that means you end up injuring yourself. There is a cost at some point in time, and young people can't feel that cost when they're doing it, and when they're training those things, they absolutely cannot feel that cost.
yeah, absolutely. I think of it almost as a weird analogy, but I think of it like trying different foods over the years. Like when you're young, you like to try all the different foods, and when you get older, well, I've already tried a bunch of these foods. Like I already understand if I like them, if I don't like them. You start to understand your own preferences within, just food itself, and that obviously translate through movement over time. But one thing that we kind of alluded to earlier that just was wanted to kind of loop back into was the clinic itself. And you kind of talked about how we had the chance to work with a couple players in that time period, um, both baseball, and then we worked with a football player, and we'll kind of get into all that. But the first thing is from the education portion, what kind of stuck out to you or stood out to you during the education portion of it when we're actually talking about the clinic and we're showing the slides? What was like your initial thoughts through that process and that part of the week?
I think for me, the biggest thing was when you start looking at the slides and you start talking about it, it gets a little bit harder as you get deeper into all of the preferences. When you start looking at the aerial slides versus the terrestrial slides, and you start just thinking about watching somebody lean forward before they run, or in your mind, we have a football player that stuck out to me this whole time, because we're looking at terrestrials, and in a lot of people's mind, if they don't really understand it, they may be thinking like, okay, like Tony was at the clinic, and in his
Hmm.
mind, like it immediately was like, all right, if somebody can jump high, they're an aerial, and if somebody's slow and kind of moves like a sloth, they're a terrestrial. And I'm like, no, man, like we've got a football player right now that is type 2 muscle fiber, that is 100% terrestrial, and every acceleration race we do, he hits the highest miles per hour. Like you can still operate in those capacities regardless of which one that you are. But it stuck out to my mind because instantly he looks like he's trying to sit down. And the whole time since he got here, when we're running sprints, I'm trying to get him to extend his back leg, and I am trying to get him up, because that's what I've been taught and that's what I've studied in running, right? We want to get that extension, and he just keeps sitting lower and lower and moving faster and faster. And so finally we're watching these slides, and I'm like, That's why he's moving fast. He doesn't need to get up. Like, why am I trying to change it? He's beating everybody else. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, man, if you're hitting 17.5 miles per hour inside of 15 yards, brother, we can get that to 18 or 19 miles per hour if you'll just drive off that back leg. But that's not the truth. And, the other one, obviously, we talked about it at the clinic. The running stuff for me is so much easier to see because it's done at such a high clip. You're not going to force somebody to be somewhere they don't want to be. When they're running as fast as they can, they're going to be where they want to be, but you can train them out of where they want to be. And my son stuck out specifically, always been a really good accelerator, always been a strong kid relative to other kids his age, partly because he's been in the weight room with me all the time. But he's pretty twitchy. He's got pretty good type 2 muscle fibers. But we were doing all acceleration based stuff, all horizontal jumping, all resisted running and heavy sled pushing and all this stuff. And we spent a good 6 to 8 months doing a lot of this stuff for football. And I'm just watching him and I'm looking at these times and I'm like, he's getting slower. I don't understand. And then watching those slides, I'm like, I completely understand. He's really reactive. He's great at creating stiffness. And every cue that I've given him in the last 6 to 8 months has been about his lower half. I haven't even talked to him about his shoulders and his upper half. And everything that we've done has been opposite of the spectrum that he's on for aerial and terrestrial and for type 1 and type 2. So changing some of that stuff really quickly. And then all of a sudden, changing the cues. The other thing that was the cues, like it makes a lot more sense. Him and our running back that you guys worked with, when I cue him for anything, whether it's acceleration, whether we're talking about jumping, lateral jumping, reactive jumping, doesn't matter. Everything for their balance, everything that I'm cueing them is about their shoulders. Where are their shoulders at? Because that's where they create balance. Whereas, our other football player that I was talking about earlier is a terrestrial, much more grounded. I'm cueing him everything about his lower body because even though I don't see the extension, he's using that cue to push harder off the ground. It just looks different than what I think it should look like. So, you take that step back and then realize it, and it's amazing what you find. Because that athlete is actually the only athlete on the football team, besides one other kid that's a terrestrial, that keeps up with our running back on anything.
That, like, you talk about like the power of intention and giving the right cue and the brain and body working together is so crazy to me when you find it, and everyone knows, like when you finally find the language that makes sense for the athlete in front of you, a lot of things click. And watching how the brain and body work together just based off simple words or simple thought process or understanding where they're creating their balance and power is so crazy. And I wanted to bring it back to, like, when you started talking about, seeing one of your athletes who's super, super fast, but everything he does is getting into flexion first to create that power. It's like Nick and I talked about earlier. It's the difference between, you've seen everything, like you have seen that for your entire career studying movement. Now it's just like recognizing why that's happening. And the difference between seeing and recognizing, I think, is super, super huge. And, for you who has studied movement, it's now giving you the understanding of, okay, why is this happening and why is this successful for him? Where, if you take one of your aerial running backs and they try to move like that, they become slower. But when he does that, he actually becomes faster. Why is that? And now you can start to shift some of your cues, some of your starting positions, some of your workout routines, and putting them toward the right rabbit hole. It's not rigid. And I know you understand that. And for our listener, it's not rigid. It's not going to be the same plan for everyone that's a terrestrial, same plan for everyone that's aerial. But you start to understand, why what you're seeing is what you're seeing and why that makes sense for them or where it doesn't make sense for them, like your son.
Yeah. It's, as far as like the cueing and the actual being able to coach, it frees you up as a coach. And then you start seeing things like when you look at our running back, he is an absolute specimen. Like, he may end up being, I will be shocked if he doesn't end up being the most complete, best athlete that I ever get to work with in my career. And I've worked with a lot of really, really good athletes. But when he tried, like if we're doing jumping exercises, if we're doing like lateral changes of direction and doing stuff like that, and he tries to sit low, not because I cue him to, but he just tries to, he looks so unathletic. It is not even funny. And it just stands out because of the way he is and the way he moves, everything he does. People that don't even know who he is walk in the weight room and they're like, oh my God, is that him? Like you instantly see him, right? And everything he does looks awesome. And then when you try to get him to run slow, he looks like he has no rhythm whatsoever. Like he can't do it. Like it's not a part of the way he moves. When you try to get him to sit low and change directions, which is what we teach, right? If I'm trying to change directions, I've got to be able to deaccelerate and then reaccelerate it. So I got to sink into my hips a little bit. When you cue that stuff with him and he actually sits in there, I mean, I can't, like, it's amazing. You're looking at a world-class athlete and then you're looking at him and you're like, what are you doing? Like, you're about to fall over. It doesn't make any sense. So having some of those, I will say having some of those extreme examples makes it so much easier to see, because there are definitely people that live in the middle of the continuum and do everything pretty good. And it's much harder to identify some of those things. But seeing that stuff really helps you. Okay, hey, that makes a lot of sense. And the cueing thing, like we're kind of going through it with our baseball guys right now, because not all of them are being able to necessarily translate the changes that they've made and bring it into the game all the time. And from what I can tell, I think the biggest reason why is just because we're doing some of the stuff on the baseball side of things, but we're not doing it every day. We're not going through these drills intentionally because this is my preference. We're not identifying these things. And not all of our coaches were at the clinic. So, they're all on board and not necessarily trying to be counterproductive. But when they're cueing some of those guys about their lower half, it makes sense to them, but it doesn't make sense to the athlete. And you can kind of see those things. And I'm like, no, look, just go back and watch the game swing. Like I understand what you're saying. Don't slam your front foot in the ground. We don't want to lean forward. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Nobody wants them to do that, but that's not actually what's happening when they're missing. If you slow the game film down, those guys are missing because they're 70-30 on their backside and then they're overstriding. So it's just the fact that we're talking about the lower half. It is not good for them. We need to talk about staying tall, and we need to work with the hands. And those are things that they understand and that are going to get them back on track much quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what a lot of the things that we did together when we were in the cage, when I was able to come out there, me and Sam were with you guys. But can you talk to from what you saw and your point of view in the cage session? Since that was a lot of what we did, and your son getting the chance to swing it in there a bit. How did you see his movements kind of develop over time, and then how does that maybe translate back to how he used to move, or kind of just take us through what you saw from that cage time?
I mean, the thing about when you're doing it in the cage and you're flipping, I think when you find the right cues, you can find it's got some immediate feedback. I think the hard part is some of the guys get immediate feedback and feel really good. And then some of those things, if you're way out of your pattern, are going to take a little bit of time. And if they don't feel everything perfect, then they're a little bit less likely to buy in and trust it, right? So the biggest thing that I took out of the cage was how you guys took him from the tee to flipping to with different drills and different focuses. And I think that's where, like, for me, that was the intentional part that I saw, because that works along the lines of my brain, right? When I'm building an athlete to do something better in sport, we're not running the ball in the weight room, right? I'm creating patterns and building strengths that I want to translate out there. So for me, watching that cage work was exactly what that is. We got a couple drill. Oh, you don't like that one? Cool. We throw it out. Like, it's nothing mandatory. If you don't like it and you don't feel good, then then cool, let's do this one. And then you start doing this drill and it's like, oh, wow, that feels a little bit better. And then, oh, wow, that ball's popping off that bat a little bit harder. And then you get the feedback from the athlete and, you know, some of the words that we heard, you know, I feel free. That's a great word for me. Like I feel connected. I feel free. Those are things that we want them to feel and that are going to make sense to them and make them want to repeat it. So the biggest thing that I took out of it was just the intentional side of, if you can identify the 2 or 3 drills that go into getting you in the right position and getting you on balance and helping you feel free, then that's a super easy way to build that pattern without me saying a word anymore. Now you know what feels good. You know what to do. You get in, you start on the tee, you do your flips. And then by the time we're actually swinging, I'm no longer thinking about what I'm trying to do. I'm already in preference. I'm already in balance. And now it's just, I'm beating the guy in front of me.
100%. I think it's a really good example to, like you said, like there are some players who are going to feel it immediately, and there's going to be some players where it takes a little longer. And that's definitely where I was in terms of my transition. It took me, you know, my entire fall at Maryland to finally feel what, you know, an associated type of mover felt like. And when it clicked, I was like, oh crap, here we go. Like now we're on a roll. And I think, you know, any advice for coaches out there who are listening and you're starting with a player, you know, there will be some players who it might just be a small little cue, like their motor shoulder for direction, that unlocks them. But where we start with every player is their balance. And that is the overarching theme of this podcast is, okay, are they getting into their number one? Like, are they balancing, you know, where it takes the least amount of energy and resources to balance? And then are they rotating around, you know, the leg that they prefer, whether it's more around their front leg or more around their back leg? And if I'm really good there in their balance and where they're rotating, a lot of the stuff up top cleans up, and then you can just kind of go into layers. So I think the biggest thing when we start with any of our players is if they're balanced. Some players are naturally going to be balanced. They may be balanced in their back heel on their backside, and that's what we've always taught, but that still means they're balanced for them. We can move on to other things in our checklist to see if is that a little bit off. What is your feedback? Are you feeling stuck? Are you feeling spinny? Are you having trouble with breaking balls away? Or are you feeling free? And that feedback, like you said from Brice, like super, super important to tap into what the athlete is feeling because they know themselves better than anyone else. We can observationally see like, hey, you're moving more free, but until they tell us and confirm it, or until they say, it feels a little stuck, or I feel imbalanced. Okay, we have 17 more cues we can go to that are around the same theme. We have 2 to 3 more constraints that can help you feel that a little bit better. So that athlete feedback and starting with balance is easily the best place to start.
I think that's a great word, man. And I think, you know, Nick alluded to it earlier. I'm trying to remember exactly what he said, talking about people thinking, you know, MPE is like super scientific-y, and that's the point of it. It's not. And like even some of the guys that were a little uncomfortable, I was like, I tried to explain it to them and help them understand there is no, you have to do this, you have to do this. There is only get in the cage, get comfortable, find your balance. Where is that at? Let's start there. And then if something feels good and it works, use it. If something doesn't feel good and you don't feel connected, or you're losing your balance every time, there's a reason why. So scrap it, throw it out, and you know, stick with being on balance first, because we know through all of the actual science and actual studying, we know if you're on balance, you have better eyesight. Right? Hitting is 100%. When you talk about baseball, you talk about softball. Hitting is 100% about being on balance and being on time. Those are the two keys. It is not about how hard you swing. It is not about how you get your hands on the ball. If you have those two things, you're going to be successful. If you can't see the ball and you're all over the place and you have no balance, you're not going to be able to use any of those great hit tracks metrics you got. None of that stuff is going to matter in a real game because nobody's going to throw you the same pitch in the same spot more than once. It's just not going to happen.
No doubt. What I think is so cool about it, and you bring up a good point, is like it's daunting because there's vocabulary and there's terms and yeah, there's studies that are around it. But in the grand scheme of things, it's a very simplistic concept, right? Like allow people to move how they want to move. And um, a lot of the things that we're talking about here is taking a step back, do more time watching, spend more time listening. Hey, man, does this, like, what does it feel like when you do this? And what does it feel like when we do the opposite? Okay, the opposite feels natural and it feels easy. Great. Why don't we keep doing this? Right? Your output's the same, your performance is the same, and you're feeling better. Seems like it's more efficient for you at that point. So, the other part of it is like, yeah, we can make small little adjustments from a drill standpoint, but that also means that we can make small adjustments from a programming standpoint, right? And one of the things that often happens is we get stuck wanting to force one drill, maybe, or maybe we don't do it in drill work, but we do it in programming in terms of the weight room. We all have to do back squat. Like we're all going to back squat, we're all going to deadlift. Well, there's a ton of variations for those lifts that you could still, as the strength and conditioning coach, you can still say, check, we're good. We accomplished what we wanted to do today. But at the same time, we're doing it in different variations. So I'm curious, and we started talking about this a little bit, but can you go into kind of the adaptations that you've made from the programming side and how you've kind of implemented the MP for those individuals?
Yeah. So that's a really good point, and it is definitely hard to wrap your mind around it on the strength and conditioning side of things, especially in the day and age that we're in right now, with how much sports science is out there and how much information is out there and how much information that we're gathering with force plates, with grip testing, with laser timing gates, with velocity-based training systems. None of that information is bad. None of it. But how you interpret that information and how you use that information is so important. And I do not think that we are interpreting it and using it to its highest level right now across the board. If we were, people wouldn't be getting hurt as much. So I alluded to it earlier. I had my own personal story. So I've had 4 knee surgeries. I'm an aerial, and so my knee's good now. I have range of motion back. I've been training. And so after this last surgery, I started doing more of the microdosing and started doing more aerial based workouts, and I'm feeling better. So doing a lot of dynamic warm ups, not doing a lot of slower warm ups, training almost no deep flexion. I didn't do any squatting for about 2 months. I did some single leg stuff, but not focusing on the deep flexion, more so focusing on the top half and the extension. I cut out all of my leg extensions, all of my leg curls that I was doing for rehab, and did as much vertical and reactive jumping as my knee can safely handle right now, and stuck with that for 8 weeks. Our athletic trainers tested my quad to hamstring ratio on both legs before that to kind of see where I was at after my surgery. And then we tested again after the 8 weeks. And after the 8 weeks of almost zero quad dominant training, a little bit of single leg flexion, but not very much. Everything basically being extension based, jumping, all of that stuff. Not only was my ratio better from both legs, quad to hamstring, but my quads were much stronger than they were in the first test. So not only did my hamstring strength go up, my quad strength went up. So that showed me right there, okay, well, in a typical program, from the first numbers, what I would have done would have been a whole lot of static strengthening for my hamstring, and then a whole lot of deep flexion to train the quad and hamstring together. So more squatting, more split squatting, to get into those deeper ranges of motion and challenge those positions, to even out my legs and make sure that everything was balanced. And I did a lot of my exercises in a staggered stance, putting my extension leg where I wanted my extension leg and not doing the same number of reps on both legs, but focusing on letting my extension leg be my extension leg and letting my flexion leg be my flexion leg. And the numbers didn't lie. So for me, that was eye-opening. And it's like, all right, we're taking all of this data we have and we're looking at somebody jumping off of force plates, and we're looking at, their eccentric force, and we're looking at their percentage of right foot and left foot. Obviously, there's some outliers. If we're 30-40% off from one leg to the other, there may be some risk for injuries and things like that. But we should see some asymmetries. People should probably create more propulsion with their extension leg than their flexion leg. People should probably create more force with their flexion leg when they land than their extension leg. So trying to look through those things and tie all of that in is kind of the challenge that I'm putting on myself right now. But for me, that's helped me really implement everything that we're doing into the weight room, and understanding that I saw it in real time with real numbers with my muscles. So just because this athlete needs to work on his quad strength doesn't mean if he's an aerial and doesn't like to get into deep flexion that I got to force him into deep flexion and doing single leg and bilateral squats every single day. We can get those things evened out training under their preferences. So that gave me really even more freedom as a coach to understand, okay, hey, I need to change the way I'm thinking. I don't have to force these things to get these results. I need to stick with identifying the movement patterns. If you hate back squatting and you're not going deep, how much weight do you think you're going to put on the back squat? I'm a strength coach. If you're going to back squat, there is zero reason to back squat unless you're trying to go 1.5 times your body weight plus. Otherwise, you're not moving enough weight for it to change anything anyways. So if that's not a realistic goal and that's not something that fits into your sport, okay, why not do something else? Allowing the freedom to focus more on single leg movements, changing levels, whether it be, trap bar off the blocks, trap bar with high handles, trap bar with low handles, pulling and jumping off the blocks, going from different positions. For me, that's always been in my wheelhouse anyways, because of Olympic weightlifting. We do pulls from different positions to train the bar path. So when you start watching that stuff, it just makes perfect sense. And you can see really quickly who's successful in which positions and where they want to be.
Yeah, I love that. And like with using that within, the micro dosing kind of system, like how do you see that play out with your athletes now? How do they feel after that process? Or, we kind of started talking about that offline a bit, but get into kind of, okay, now we kind of made these adjustments. What are they actually feeling from it? What are you seeing from it?
Right now, everything we're seeing is super positive. As far as the big thing that I pay attention to, I love athlete feedback. I talk to them. I ask them every day, how you feeling, these kinds of things. But for me, that's not always the best feedback. The best feedback is, how do they walk into the weight room? What do they look like when the music gets cranked up? How many times are they trying to skip their lift and get out of it? People will tell you really quickly when they don't feel good. When they walk in with their head down and are we lifting today? They're not excited about getting any work, right? Maybe they're lazy. Maybe they're just feeling really bad. Maybe they're really tired or really worn down or something's hurting, right? There's a lot of things that can cause that stuff, but people will naturally tell you with their body language. Now, obviously, I'm with these guys all day, every day. So I know the guys that are generally more positive, and I know the guys that are generally, a little bit lower energy, and doesn't mean they're in a bad mood, but, they just kind of move around a little bit more like a sloth than some of the other guys. And that's fine, but you can still see, you're going to see trends with people. I don't have anybody right now that I have to go find and be like, hey man, why didn't you work out today? Across the board. And I'm telling you guys right now, we are in the spring. And in the spring, consistently, since I have been in this field, that sun comes out, everybody goes outside, and everybody avoids the weight room. And right now, across the board, track, lacrosse, softball, baseball, tennis, men's, women's, across the board, everybody is getting in, and everybody is trying to get their work in because they feel better. So for me, that's the biggest feedback is I know they're feeling good and I know they feel like it's working because they want to continue to do it.
That's freaking
and then the other thing, like with our pitchers, we'll do typically a bigger lower body day after they pitch. And so I just give them, we've got 5 or 6 different exercises and you get to pick, here's the sets and reps. And this is what we're trying to go for today, but you pick which one you like and which one helps you feel good. And right now, everybody's feeling really good and everybody's getting on the bump and throwing a lot of strikes. We've been pitching really well. So everything's working the way.
Love that.
Hopefully it stays that way.
Absolutely.
I love it. Bryce, you touched on something when you were going over, your own strength and conditioning and, your kind of routine right now from an asymmetry standpoint. I wanted David to tap into that and talk about how we look at, asymmetries and, a lot of people we talk with in the industry, we perceive something as a weakness and try to bring it, even or up to, what our strength is where, David, you want to touch on, how we see that asymmetry and how we want to keep that.
Yeah, it's just because actually when you are too symmetric, you don't move. As simple as this. So we actually need an asymmetric body to be able to create movement. But where Brice is right, like we don't want a too big one. So yes, there's a range, percentage where we know that we can keep that asymmetry. But again, the performance of the player, the data measurements you have, all force plate and everything, all those things going to guide you to tell you like, no, the asymmetry is too big. Like we need to work more on your flexion or whatever, make your extension more terrestrial in a certain way. But yeah, no, the asymmetry of your body is, again, in the sagittal plane and in the frontal plane. So we are either balancing ourselves more in front or more backward and more on the right or more on the left. So when you start to understand that and see that, and you just understand that to create movement, you need to be asymmetric. There's only 2 ways. I'm repeating that sentence every time. There's only 2 ways to create movement. Apply an external force on something, then this thing's going to move, or having an imbalance. And in the human body, to create imbalance, we need to be asymmetric. There's no other way around. So it just have to, now it can go deep because this asymmetry can be in the antagonist muscle. So the timing of contraction and what is the opposite of contraction in English? I forgot.
Eccentric.
Say that again.
Eccentric.
No, the
eccentric
opposite of contraction.
Relaxation.
Relaxation.
That's what I think.
Okay, that's good for me. That's gonna be cut anyway. So even like this asymmetry works inside your body when you create movement because one muscle works in contraction and the antagonist muscle relax. So even when you want to create movement, actually you are using dynamic imbalance into your system. And so every kind of movement is based on that. So those asymmetry are dynamic and actually they are very important for the human body to create movement.
And I know we could be going down those rabbit holes all day long and, things I learn from David every day and things that I continue to learn from Brice every day from a strength and conditioning side. And, I think that ties into our last question, before we hop off for this episode. But Brice, if you could give advice to a coach, a strength and conditioning coach to be specific in the weight room when they first learn about motor preferences, what would your advice be?
The first thing you got to start with is accept the unexpected, and you can't just follow along with what we've always done because we've always done it. Take a step back, watch the way your athletes are moving, and then build from there. Movement is so much more important than anything else we do. Every sport is different. Everything that you're training is different. They all have different requirements. They all use different energy systems. Movement is the key to everything that we are doing, whether it's trying to be better at performance or whether it's trying to be healthy or whether it's trying to feel good enough and be recovered to come back the next day. The better you move, the better you do all of those things. So get rid of all of the stipulations you have about you have to do this or you have to do this, that. There are no have tos. There are only take a step back, watch people move, and then evaluate that. Are they moving good? If they're not moving good and everyone in your program moves like a robot, something's wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, Brice, we appreciate you coming on. We appreciate your time. Really, really helpful, valuable perspective on it from the strength and conditioning side, but from multiple layers of different sports, right? And that's the beauty of what Motor Preferences does. So again, we appreciate you taking the time. And until next time, thanks guys for watching.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.